Welcome to the ITSPmagazine podcast network. You're listening to a new Redefining Cybersecurity podcast with Sean Martin. Have you ever thought that we're selling cybersecurity insincerely, buying it indiscriminately, and deploying it ineffectively? Well, perhaps we are. So let's look at how we can organize a successful InfoSec program that integrates people, process, technology, and culture to drive growth and protect business value. Knowledge is power. Now, more than ever.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Marco.
Sean.
You know what's cool?
Not you.
No, certainly not me. Not me. That's definitely true. But
no, you're cool.
What is
you're
cool?
Dude.
What is? I surround myself with cool people, and I feel grateful to have met two cool new people.
And where? Where did you meet?
And you happen to be along for the ride for this. Thanks to Mastodon, infosec.exchange, good old different Jay. Help pull that together and bring a community together, and there's some good conversations, good engagement, and there was a thread that we happened to connect to and get involved with that brings us all together. And for those watching, can see Jay Thoden Van Velzen and Mehran on with us, and for those listening, you'll just know that they're on, and we don't do predictions on ITSPmagazine. Sometimes we actually poke fun at it, but the reality is that stuff happens. There are trends, there are things happening, and vendors try to push that with the marketing. Analysts try to push that with their reports. And then there's reality in the programs and in the SOC that say, yeah, but. Yeah, but.
But also, I got to add, if there is one business that you want to try to always do prediction and it's to be proactive instead of reactive, that is security and cybersecurity. Right. So that you have to have that futuristic hat on all the time, but not just to sell stuff, maybe. How about that, Sean? Yeah,
exactly. And we were talking before we joined about guitars, and I think we all four of us have guitars. And I'm going to use that because guitar is one of many instruments that I have. So I am a musician and I play music, and I don't play the guitar, even though I have one. So my point is, I am a musician. I love music. I can play music. I can play piano and drums and all kinds of different things. When guitar comes, I just haven't spent the time to do it. I feel that's the same for security professionals. Right? You get all these things. You can be a security professional and have all this stuff thrown at you. Doesn't mean you are good at all of it. Doesn't mean you could use it all. It sits, Marco, in your case, hanging on a wall. Right? You actually pull it off the wall and use it. So I think that's kind of the struggle that we're going to touch on a bit today. Before we do that, though, a few words from our sponsors, the dogs. But before we get sponsored by the dog, let's hear from Jay and Mehran, who they are. Jay, introduce us. To the public.
My name is Jay Thoden Van Velzen. The little dog is right there, but if I reach for him, I'm probably, he loves to chase. So if I go and try to pick him up, you'd be seeing me like running around this room for a little bit.
A distraction for a few minutes.
My name is Jay.
What's going on?
Yep, I am the strategic advisor to the Chief Security Officer of SAP. In the last couple of years, I've ran a bunch of cloud security initiatives with a whole bunch of other people. That gave me a big perspective of sort of the market of cloud security, the challenges that you deal with when you have to grow very fast, and the cloud transformation in your own organization as well as your own customers, and how challenging that is. I probably have never had a more difficult job than today because of all the sort of multi-dimensional challenges that you have to deal with, risks that we face, and the scale of both the market, the things that you can do yourself, the high velocity of the platforms, like moving into the cloud, and then on top of that, run on Kubernetes is not going to make things easier, changes your security tooling, and we're all trying to figure that out with varying success.
Yeah, you just lift and shift your security program right over, Jay. It's easy. Your team's already skilled up, and it's fabulous. It's amazing, that stuff. Technology saves it.
It's going to work, especially your network tooling.
That's right. I'm sure we'll spend a bit of time talking about that. Mehran, what's going on?
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's great to meet all of you and see you again, Jay. My name is Mehran Farimani, and I'm the co-founder of a company called RapidFort. And the CEO. And RapidFort optimizes and secures modern cloud applications. It just shrinks them down, gets rid of a lot of the software that you don't need in there, and as a result, you have less noise to deal with. So that's what we do.
Nice. So, all right. So this thread was on Mastodon. I kind of teased that out, and it was led by Jay. And what did you say, Jay? You said the predictions of cloud, right? And you said misconfigurations, known vulnerabilities, and leaked credentials were going to be the three biggest sources of breaches. Let's just start there. Why do you think those things? And I think you even said that
because they've been for years and
years.
It's not going to change, mostly because it's hard, right? Like the basics are actually really hard, and we have to rethink how they get done. Right? Like, there are some ways to get a grip on that, but is the high velocity and the mass of it, the autonomy of developer teams increasingly through the cloud, means that if you're not careful, you're always chasing, right? So misconfigurations, like that open S3 bucket, I think there were just this week at least about 3 cases where that was going on. Known vulnerabilities, you can sometimes be 2 weeks late, and then your whole business might be at risk. Right. So these are really simple things. And then the leaked credentials through like an inadvertent GitHub posting somewhere, and suddenly there's a crypto miner on your cloud account. I think a lot of us in the cloud have seen. So still trying to get on top of that is really hard. And that more the volume of the landscape or the size of the landscape, the harder it gets. Right. Plus, it's no longer the case that you can point at a firewall team that put all the rules in. Now there's hundreds of people potentially that configure a network perimeter in some way on a VPC. So keeping track of that and then cascading that in an effective way through the organization is really, really hard. And see, I haven't talked about any sophisticated AI-based security tooling yet.
It's well, 2 of them are directly human. The middle one is caused by humans, but if by bad coding or maybe it's not unthoughtful, non-thoughtful.
Well, and sometimes old practices, right? Like the more you have an automated CI/CD pipeline that deploys the same thing multiple times over, and you can quickly correct, rather than somebody trying to build a landscape sort of by hand in a web application admin console. The one is far safer than the other.
Switching tabs over back to Mastodon to look at the thread there, because what I want to hear from you, Mehran, some of your thoughts on this, because I think we touched on it before we started recording, and I alluded to it in the intro, just the massive amounts of technology. So there's technology to make the business run, and then technology to protect against the risks that we introduce by the other technology. And I think part of the challenge that I see, and I don't know how you view this from a prediction or future trend perspective, is that everything is important, right? You can't just have vuln management, right? You can't just, because it has to also do config validation. You can't just have encryption, because if you're putting keys out in GitHub, doesn't matter, right? So you have to kind of have this full circle view, but then that means a bunch of technologies perhaps and more staff, and with all of that comes greater program complexity. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on this? Are the vendors kind of creating some of this challenge for us, or how's it looking for you? I know you're from a vendor, so you don't want to bash yourself, but
No. Thanks for that, Sean. No, I won't bash myself. But look, first of all, the whole sort of security issue, and whether you can code better and all that kind of stuff. You have to keep in mind that software systems are probably the most complex artifacts of human intelligence, in the sense that we can build systems that have millions and millions of moving parts and pack them up together and then make it all work. You can't do that with mechanical physical pieces. You see what I'm saying? And so they are very prone to errors and bugs and oversights and those kinds of things. That's not, that at least to the extent that I can see, that's not going to go away. At the same time, if you look at what's happened over the past decade or 15 years and so on, so we've gotten a lot better at building software. A lot of it is driven by open source components. We get these high quality open source components and we include them in our applications, and we build applications a lot quicker than we did before, like probably 3 to 10 times faster than we did 15 years ago. So the pace of innovation is picked up quite a bit by being able to reuse these high quality open source components that we put into our applications. The other side of it, the way that we manage software projects has changed quite a bit. We've gone from these waterfall methodologies back, in the data center days. We'd plan a project at a year ahead of time, and then we had some really, well-defined milestones to hit. And about a month and a half before the project was to go out, the security team got a hang of it, and they come and work with you and fix the big issues, and you drop that into your infrastructure, and you come back and repeat, next year again. That's changed into the sort of DevOps, cloud DevOps methodology, where we're just cranking out productivity out of our engineering team and delivering that value into our business and into our customers in real time, almost like every hour we make changes into our production environments, and that stuff just flows through as it comes from engineering, gets through the CI/CD automated pipelines if you're doing it correctly, goes through your tests, drops into particular environments where you could sort of curate it a little bit, drops into some sort of a canary release where you could make sure that everything is good, and then you turn it on. Everybody has that feature, and that's amazing. That's like multiple orders of magnitudes faster than how we.
So here some of the challenges come in, and that is a lot of security tooling isn't bought for the next 6 months. It's for like 2-3 years. So you have to make decisions about what is going to be useful for the next 3 years. And then you have to get it adopted within your organization, deployed, integrated into your SIEM, and generating useful alerts, while the landscape around you is changing rapidly, right? So we had to make decisions 3 years ago that ultimately did not really quite pan out the way we had hoped they would. And had to take a different approach, right? So you want to be quick. You want to help your developer organization to meet their velocity that they want to reach, but at the same time, you also can't say every 6 months, like, okay, we'll get that next new tool that looks at this specific little new use case that we hadn't covered before.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is let me get in, because this is how we actually started this conversation on Mastodon, because you posted something like similar to that, and you said, well, this is nothing new. I can do this already with what I have. Right. So in my head, when you think about the product, I'm going to bring a couple of examples here. One goes back in the day that Sean and I started working in doing marketing for InfoSec companies, where it seems like everybody was using either a server picture, or because the box wasn't there anymore, the operating system or the software itself. And so there is no way to represent that. And I understand how back in the days you needed to actually put something in the hands of someone to do an update, and you may wait for the time, I don't know, the RSA conference was coming up, the Black Hat's coming up, or CES if you're presenting technology and so forth. But now it seems like the marketing system, the branding system, the vendor system overall, it's kind of like you're still trying to do it the old way. But as you're mentioning, in our industry, you need to update constantly. So it becomes more of a service than a product itself. And it blows my mind how you're still trying to present it as is the newest ever beautiful thing ever done before. Throw away everything you had so far. It's like you want to go back to the guitar. I'd rather get a Les Paul, right, from a long, long time ago than some weird guitar now. If it does the job.
Telecasters, the first model.
There you go. There you go. So my point is there a, like, are they not in sync, the way the marketing think and the way that the
I can only give a perspective, and I'm certainly not speaking for the company here, but so just out of the experience that we had, and I'll say I had myself, is that the cybersecurity has sort of exploded with the maturation of the data center, right? It made a whole bunch of assumptions and central management in a certain way. And now we all go cloud, and it's all kind of new and weird. But the irony is that a lot of times what we're finding is that if you think of compliance scanning, it's like scanning for something, collecting data, putting data enrichment around that so that it becomes meaningful to the organization, distribute that out to get some action. Vulnerability scanning, it's essentially the same thing, it's just a different scanner, right? Threat detection, ultimately the same thing. You have something running that detects something that you take through some data engineering process. So I think ironically, while cloud security is bringing all of these different cybersecurity disciplines back together, because the combination of, you know, is this vulnerability actually exposed to the internet? Maybe I don't care that much, right? Like brings all of these disciplines together rather than fragments them out if they have. Because if you go on a show floor these days, then you see this, that, and the other 15,000 different tools. And it's like, but I get a lot of value just from getting the cloud audit logs, putting a Python script on top of it and look for a fairly deterministic things that I'm interested in, right? So I think that makes, I think this is a really shaky market, right? Like I've been there before, like I've been in the Valley for a while. I remember the dot-coms a bit and other times, like I always think for an industry that's not super, super giant, because cybersecurity is not that giant if you think of, say, oil business or something like that. Once you start seeing advertisement on Formula One cars, probably something's going to happen, right? And when organizations start looking at, look, this is so much money. This is so much money. There's an open source tool that does 80% of it, and I have 4 or 5 engineers dedicated to it, make the tool better. Maybe if you're a basic feature, I can build that myself, right? And I think that's why I think there's a, you know, the bottom might fall out because they're all using the open source tooling that's in the CNCF landscape. The top end might fall away because they can build half of it itself. And maybe there's a middle layer that can benefit from cloud native solutions and MDR and that kind of stuff. But it's really hard to see how it can sustain this entire market.
Right. And Mehran, on your side, from the vendor side, do you think there's something that can be done to work with better messaging and maybe really presenting something that has the capacity to change the game? Or what I'm saying is, I think we're all tired of buzzwords, like it's kind of like, let's get concrete maybe.
Yeah. So I think yes, there is for sure. One of the main things that we, for example, focus on is not to just go out and throw a product at a vendor and say, hey, come buy this. We've decided to take a much more consultative approach to working with our customers, understanding where they are in the journey, what the problems. A lot of the industry is not where Jay is at, in terms of skills and capabilities. In fact, the majority of the industry isn't. They're just really early on in that journey. And so one of it is to just really understanding what those problems are, and if you have a platform or tools or a good advice that you could give them, that's great. If not, then then don't throw a product at them and expect them to pay your license, and they won't use it. You'll have churn in 2 years, and that's worse than having sold the product at the beginning to begin with anyway. So that's one thing. The other part of it is, I think there is, and Jay and I talked about this before, there's just a lot of vendors in this space, and the space by design is a very segmented market, because by the nature of it, the way that it was actually developed, the market is, they said, okay, everybody should be good at their space, at their niche. There's Palo Alto should be good at firewalls or checkpoint or whatever, and someone else should be good at I don't know, EDRs and XDRs. Somebody else should be at something else, and so within each one of those, when you see such a quickly changing landscape, then it's kind of natural that you see a whole bunch of vendors coming in and trying to figure out a path and some sort of a solution, a different slant on something to differentiate themselves, and then they marry that to the kind of stuff that Gartner puts together in terms of what's the next category, what's the next, and a lot of that. I mean, Gartner is a very, very respectable organization. No means a criticism of it, but what comes out of it is what Jay called the alphabet soup, or was it Sean that called it alphabet soup? Like, if I forget, one of you guys said it's the alphabet. You just have, CSPM and DSPM and NSPM and XDR and EDR and RDR and when it comes to now mix take that and then mix it with the fact that the majority of the security professionals are compliance driven. They're not sort of resilience driven. They don't build for sort of, they build the biggest part of their work is to meet compliance. And there is a big difference between compliance and being proactive. And a good example of it is that, for compliance, you can check box that, yes, I do backups, but you don't tell them that it takes you 3 weeks for you to recover from your backups. Where you're proactive, you put designs and systems in place where you could get back up and running, within 30 minutes. And that's the shift in mentality. Now, and there's a lot of compliance requirements on the security teams, and that's why that occupies so much of their time. So mix that up with all this new change that's happening in the market, the way we develop software, build systems, run businesses, how development teams work, and all that kind of stuff. And all the compliance stuff that's coming in, all the vendors that are coming in, and it's just a big mess. Honestly, it's very confusing. You go to RSA, there's 15,000. You said 15,000 products out there. Actually, 10,000 of them do the exact same thing. So,
well, I want to get into that a bit, actually, if I can,
yeah.
and maybe Jay can comment on this, because I don't know, as you both were talking, I was thinking of analogies. Let's pulling on the car thread a little bit here. Is it as simple? Where do we sit, I guess, in terms of cybersecurity technologies? Is it different grades of unleaded that come to market, right? Which is, we can choose. One's a little more expensive, perhaps we get a little better performance, or is it unleaded versus diesel, different types of technologies? Is it fuel based, like petrol based
I think
fuels versus electrical?
it's a mix of things. It's sort of like you have a super blend,
Right.
and then you have like rocket fuel, right? Like you have the big ones, the big companies that sort of build suites, right? Largely through acquisitions and integrated them in some level of success or more success.
Yeah, because the point I want to touch on though, Jay, as you describe this, is you can't put a Tesla battery in a gasoline car, right? And you can't fuel a regular car with rocket fuel. So there comes a point
try
where
to sell me an EDR agent for the cloud for serverless workloads.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. It's like it's really tough, and that also goes a bit to what I said before, that the cycles within security may not be as fast as the developers, right? So we see the landscape change under our feet, right? Where initially it was maybe very heavy on VMs, but as we see growth, we see actually that kind of being static and move much more into like container, microservices, serverless, managed databases. And again, where do I put a endpoint solution on a managed database, right? So you have to continuously rethink what you can do and stay flexible at the same time. So making assumptions about a vendor coming in with, who by all means, no doubt, I was actually several years ago a big favor of sort of the larger companies that were trying to build these suites, thinking it would simplify things. For some it worked out, for others maybe not so much, and many of us still are picking best of breed even out of those suites, right? So somehow it didn't quite work out. Like a lot of the cloud providers themselves, I think, doing pretty decent job coming up with things, but it also, of course, is, well, first of all, you're sort of trusting the cloud provider to provide you with the security findings, and of course they have an interest, so, but there's still always like I'd like to have a third-party validation of that in some way. Whereas on the other hand, they may or may not want to move everything in their offering, and that may not suit you for whatever reasons you want. It's a really complex landscape to navigate, that constantly changing, and that alphabet soup doesn't help. Like we were actually in negotiation with one of the CNAP vendors, and I came across the term and thought it was like, oh, the greatest new thing in cloud security. I was like, oh my God, I'd never heard of it. Let's look it up. And it's like, oh, it's the company we're already talking to, right? So, the velocity of the alphabets can even confuse yourself, because this sales cycle, the purchase cycle itself may take longer than the market is reacting. That's crazy.
So let's actually go there with the also including the size and the maturity of companies and the size of their team and obviously the budget, right? I mean, Mehran mentioned that. It's like one thing is to be the big company with a really large budget and a really large team, and the other one is to say, well, I can afford a few things. That's, but it's better than nothing. So I feel like the branding and marketing, it gets a little bit more effective in that way, because you're trusting what they tell you. So let's talk about this. Maybe Mehran, again, the perspective of how you should present your product, and not just but your product in general, a vendor, cybersecurity vendor, to a small company that maybe just going to use that product, maybe 2 or 3, and maybe you need to teach them how to do it, instead of the large company that you just say, this is what I have, and they can make their own decision. Like, how do we balance this?
So first of all, we're a very young company. We're 2 years old. So nothing I should say here should be taken as a prescription on how to do things right.
Talk for other companies too.
We're exploring, but I think from our perspective, so we do have, I think, a solution that actually does solve a real problem. Going back to the 4,300 or 4,500, whatever cybersecurity vendors, what you see out there is that there's a lot of solutions out there that just do something very little different than the other thing, and a lot of them are just basically an interface on top of a whole bunch of open source tools or whatever it is. That creates a lot of noise, obviously, in the market and for the buyers. And we all know that security teams are basically completely numb to outreach. You can't call a CISO and sell them something. They sell from what they see their colleagues are buying, and they sell over time. I mean, they buy over time, and so on and so forth. So, like I said, I think, and I don't know if this is scalable. I think it just makes sense that you have a talk with people to see where they are, as opposed to just throw a product at them and say, go figure it out. To see where they are, and then see if you actually, and if you could scale that business model in some way, then I think that's the right way to sell into this market. Because, and like Jay said, whatever you start now, if you're selling to a really large company, your sales cycles are 18 months, 24 months a lot of times, right? For a big system. So by the time your product is actually sold and is in use, things have changed, and you need to be engaged with them to see where they are in that journey, how they're reacting, what's coming into the market. The threat landscape changes, the technologies to address them changes, and all that kind of stuff. And whether you're still important at that point to that company or not, you have to reevaluate it. So I don't have a formula for it yet, but at least we have a direction that we think is the right way to go, and that's what we're practicing.
But there is something that you said now twice, which is this consultative approach. And I don't think that's even unique to small companies, mid-sized, large as well. Because navigating this landscape by somebody that can help sort that out, while at the same time realizing that each company is a little bit different and some things work better. So that somebody from outside that has like good experience in, this is probably the stuff that will meet you. Once you can sort of articulate to me, like, what are your requirements? What are your most important things? What are you most worried about? What is it that your organization can bear, given the budget that you have, or, the kind of way the organization works? I've seen increasingly that the culture that an organization has is very important in what you can achieve. Some are very hierarchical, and you can put something top down. SAP is not like that, right? Other organization needs a far more collaborative, you can try to make it easier or harder. And that often depends on what is bearable within an organization. Do those things first. And then as you grow, move on. So some kind of consultative approach to help navigate those two things, I think, is actually really important for cloud transformation.
Yeah, that's how we feel also. I mean, and a lot of times very early on, you figure out that this is just not the right customer. The problems are completely different. I mean, we talk to customers who are running workloads who have lost their source code. I mean, that's a big deal for them, and it's coming to a point where they need to do something about it. So that's important for them. Not what I'm trying to sell to them. He's got to figure that out. So I'm going to go on and talk to him in 6 months down the road, once he's, or next year, once he's figured that out. Why should I get into in the middle of his business and distract him from what's important to him?
Well, let's touch on this a little bit more, because I mean, I remember back when I was building a SIM for a big yellow company years ago. It would take us 9 to 12, sometimes 5 quarters to actually put out a product. And we'd have to align that with the 18 to 24 months, Mehran, that you pointed out that companies were buying products. Now, this is 10 plus years ago. Things have changed. And I'm wondering, because release cycles have sped up, there are so many companies, I just view the role of a CISO and their team as just being bombarded with all these new things coming out, right? And there on the other side, it's all these new business enabling technologies that their IT ops and data ops teams are deploying, and they're trying to bridge those two streams or floods of things that are coming at them. And I'm just wondering, how does that cycle look from a R&D perspective, from a SecOps program? How does a security team look at the program and say, I need to every 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it is, be looking at new technologies, putting a plan that isn't once a year buying stuff? And how do I then manage the vendors that come to me to kind of keep the flow off me so I can keep my head above water? I don't know who wants to. Jay, you want to take that?
I think the first thing is why, like going back to my predictions, right? It's just I stopped caring about esoteric threats as long as not my entire landscape has no public S3 bucket, has everything blocked off, has no vulnerabilities in the landscape. That's almost impossible, right? So managing those processes right, and make sure that, you know, we have scanners running all the time to look for any secrets in source code and that kind of stuff. So to focus on those three first. If I get that right, then I'm compliant, I'm reasonably secure, and our threat intel and detection team can actually have the breathing space to start looking for the weird stuff, right? So I think compliance gets knocked a little bit. You know, compliance is not security, but if it gets you, these compliance controls are not there entirely accidentally, right? It's a good thing to encrypt your stuff, right? It's a good thing to, you know, make sure that you have reasonably high TLS versions in use, like all of that good, that you keep your certificates up to date and all of that stuff. So doing that well, right, is the basic stuff. I don't really get distracted so much by somebody who wants to, you know, do deep packet inspection on things right now, or a 5-year zero trust program that doesn't start with doing some of these basics first, right? Just try to do asset management on a reasonably large organization. That's not easy. Focus on that stuff first.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is that obviously cybersecurity is a pretty vast field. I think, I don't know, there's like 10, 15 categories within the space. But there are a lot of those workflows that you see today that could be largely automated if you know the organization well, you know, as opposed to, again, just, you know, here's my tool, let's try to jam it into your workflow, and you try to figure out how to use it, you know. And so if you understand those things and you could automate those processes to a great extent, then that's where you add value to the organization from a vendor perspective. If you
I'm going to ask you this. I'm sorry, Mehran, but at this point, rather than, and I see a lot of marketing stuff, here's the threat, here's our response. And nowhere in there is, here's your environment and here's what you're trying to accomplish as a business. How do we help with that? At least not a lot of the marketing stuff I see. Do you think that would be?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there are some good products that you drop in, and you can start getting value out of them pretty quickly. And you know, if they execute well, then they do become well known and they get quick adoption within the security community. If they play it right, but you know, those are, again, just one segment of the market. I think typically you see them. It is important to sort of understand where a company is in their journey and of how they develop and deliver software, how security overlays on top of those things. What are the skills that they have? You know, is the majority of the companies that we talk to, for example, security teams have a difficult time speaking to developers because developers don't want to chase down CVEs in MySQL or, you know, those kind of things. And so we try to help change that discussion to not be around CVs, but be around, code quality and, things that they could do to improve their, what comes out of their teams as an engineering piece of work, not chasing down vulnerabilities in other people's codes. But where I was going with this is that, once you understand where they are, then, then you'll see what you have in your set of skills and expertise and tool sets and so on that matches that. And if it doesn't match, then, maybe it's the wrong timing, maybe it's just the wrong customer or whatever. But then you don't waste your time or their time or their money at that point. And you move on to work with some. There is the space is pretty wide, and there are a lot of problems to solve. There are good problems to solve, and you could actually come up with solutions that make a significant impact on them. But you have to really focus and understand how those problems are being dealt with on a day-to-day basis by security teams and by development teams, and what you're going to do to address those in an effective way, as opposed to just here's I have this one piece of technology and I connect it to the other piece and I put a UI on it and I call it this new acronym and then let me try and sell it. And that makes it difficult for actually companies, at least smaller companies who have innovative solutions to gain access to the same users and customers. You have to find clever ways of doing things.
So this is going to give me the note for the last question, which I normally bring it to the future. And in this case, we started with prediction. I don't want a prediction. I want to go somewhere different, where it's more like a wish list. Or maybe if you can get something as a gift that is in a box and you don't open it, it's like, crap, they just re-gift me something. Or they changed the package, but it's the same thing. My point is, if you had to wish for something that is really innovative, what would it be now in this industry? I mean, what do you think it could be for you, the game changer that will be like, wow, now this is a great product?
The stuff that I really like is the stuff that finds a lot of things and contextualizes that in some way. We will still have the challenges of associating that with an owner, what the actual purpose of that particular thing is, find the right person who can do something about it. But anything that can say, like, this vulnerability is important because it's customer facing, it's part of the service, it is, load balanced 15,000 times, and would allow access to customer data, versus a vulnerability that's like, okay, but it's like 5 layers in the back end. There's no chance for it to be reachable by any kind of malicious input. Maybe we'll leave that one for the next release cycle. So stuff that makes things more intelligent and therefore reduces the overhead on teams. Like, focus on the stuff that's important. I have the feeling, we're not there yet, but where, say, critical vulnerabilities and compliance becomes essentially a security incident that needs to be dealt with right now, whereas everything else becomes a compliance thing that needs to be cycled out in some way, right? Like, if you have a container that might be breached but gets recycled from raw from a known image next 5 minutes, then maybe I'm not going to run that hard until there's evidence that there's a foothold somewhere, right? I'm giving examples that hold me to any of this, but like anything that helps funnel down to what's important and can use any kind of automation or intelligence to lift up what's important, and the other alerts may be available, but it becomes more like for reporting, if you like.
I agree. And by the way, there's I'm no expert in detection response, for example. So just my field is also optimization, vulnerability management, those kinds of things. And I think that what I'll what I predict is that a lot more people know that they have just way too many vulnerabilities getting reported on their infrastructure, and then they have to figure out how to prioritize it more effectively. And yeah, you know, like Jay said, if solutions that put context and help people to sort of prioritize those things would do well. Also, solutions that help security teams influence engineering practices, I think will do well, because you know, a lot of the work needs to be at least looked into by engineering to some extent. So, but yeah, I'm sure there's many other good things that are going to come in other fields. But that's the thing that I think will happen next year. People get more visibility into the enormity of the problem if they're just looking at scans, and they'll be looking for solutions to help them prioritize in an effective way.
It really helps though, sending like developers a lot of alerts to remind them, like, I don't come and bother you if you do that over there.
Well, imagine if you're driving, right? I mean, I want the important alert to come out first and without noise. And then, you know, if something, I don't know, it's sort of is light inside under the chair breaks, who cares? But don't tell me that that's, you know, something that I need to address right now, because so you can sell me something to do that. I don't know. I mean, I love this idea of prioritizing what is important. I think that's
or the temperature was below 0 last night. Of course, the tire pressure is going to be low.
Or do tell me that it is below 0, so I slow down. Maybe, you know,
exactly.
Maybe, I don't know.
So I'm going to first thank you both for first engaging on Mastodon and connecting with each other and connecting with us to have this conversation. Really appreciate it. And I thank you for your time here today. And I'm going to take us, as I close, even further left, Mehran, where I think, Jay, you want to have visibility into all that stuff. And I think, Mehran, you want to help engineers kind of secure and safeguard the systems before it becomes a problem later. I actually want to take it all the way to the business, where the products and services are defined and these things are architected and yeah, I guess described in product requirements documents, right? Because I think if we can shave the exposure at the front end of this, I think it can save a lot of effort down the line. So I always ask guests how we can actually change the way business does business, not just how can we streamline security.
I think we're actually really lucky there. We have really good support from our executive board. There's good understanding that the kind of workloads that we tend to run brings a certain set of responsibility with it. So we thank like our internal support for that's generally not the problem. It's sort of like working with a large organization and doing the engineering and getting all the data together in a way that's usable reports. It's not for a lack of support through the organization. We're very lucky there.
That's cool.
I think that also there should be, and there will be a shift in terms of how organizations treat security as a function within the enterprise. The majority of organizations, if you go to their leadership page, you don't see a CISO there. Yet, you know, every time something goes wrong, CISO is the one that gets the axe. You know, and they have this intense amount of pressure on them in terms of compliance, keeping the lights on, you know, making sure everything's running securely, and so on. So, and everybody gets breached. You know, you're getting breached all the time. You're getting attacked all the time. But yet that's not recognized. You know, you just give a chief title to someone, but you're not recognizing that. And yes, you know, they come to your board meetings and they have to report, but you don't see them in their leadership panels and teams. And so that has to change, because it's an important message to say that this is a critical part of how you run a business, that you start by thinking that security is as important as sales, as important as development, as important as marketing, you know, all of those functions that you list out. that has to be, that message has to.
I don't disagree, but you have as much influence as your ability to communicate, right? And as security people, historically, we've been kind of crap at that, right? Like, put cat pictures over things, right? There's a certain format in security conferences that you don't bring to the boardroom, right? And I myself have had a couple of times where you try 4, 5, 6 different ways of how do we actually tell the story in a way that it resonates. Like, we can, I think, as security professionals, often do a better job of communicating and not just like, oh my God, there's a CVE, listed in this, that, and the other, in that kind of landscape, instead of expressing like, okay, what is my business risk? How am I exposed? And what's your plan to actually solve it? Right. I think that's quite often what we fail. It can't always be like, here's a very complex problem and I need more money to buy this tool, right? Like, can we express it in like, this is the actual risk to the business. If we do this, we reduce it by X much. If we do this other thing, then we probably take it away, but that you may not have the appetite for that. Then we have a very different conversation.
I love it. That's exactly what I was talking about. Super cool.
The business of security.
Business of security. There we go. Well, thanks again, both of you, Jay and Mehran, for joining. Marco, thanks for joining as a co-host today as well.
Yeah.
And for everybody listening, we'll certainly include a link to that post on Mastodon so you can chime in with your own thoughts. What did we say that you liked? What did you not like? What are your predictions? Thoughts for acronyms? You name it. Everything's all there in that thread for you to chew on.
And as weird as it may sound, Sean, on the Info Security Exchange on Mastodon, we actually talk about a lot of cool stuff, not just cybersecurity.
I agree.
There is music, there is philosophy, there is books, and so come on, there's room. We're happy.
Yeah, it's really interesting how I was on Twitter, InfoSec Twitter, for a long time, but I think far more as a consumer of what was going on.
Yeah.
And Mastodon is far more about engagement, and I think I've had more actual threads and discussions with people in the last couple of weeks than I've had in a long time on Twitter.
I think that I mean, I don't want to make this a Mastodon discussion, but I think that one of the main things is that it's just Twitter has become so asymmetrical. There are people with big megaphones, and then there are people with 20.
I agree.
And Mastodon is a lot more balanced.
It did level thing. I agree. I hope it stays that way. I don't want to see an algorithm in there, but anyway, we can talk about Mastodon another time. I'm always happy to talk social media.
Yeah.
Sean, thank you for having us.
Yeah, super cool. In the meantime, go there and check out this thread, and stay tuned for more Redefining Cybersecurity here on ITSP Magazine.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Thanks a lot, Marco. Thanks, Mehran.
Thanks, Jay.
HITRUST is a leading data protection standards development and certification organization that strives to safeguard sensitive information and manage information risk for global organizations across all industries and throughout the third-party supply chain. Learn more at hightrustalliance.net.
Imperva is the cybersecurity leader whose mission is to protect data and all paths to it with a suite of integrated application and data security solutions. Learn more at imperva.com.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Redefining Cybersecurity with Sean Martin, part of the ITSP Magazine podcast network. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share this channel and ITSPmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. And you can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.